and thank you everyone for coming tonight. I want to start by giving you a few reasons to believe I really am a liberal Democrat. I was a very early supporter of Obama back in late 2006. In the 1990s, I was president of the Fair Housing Congress of Southern California, one of the largest civil rights organizations in California. I was also heavily involved in crafting and developing and getting support for the first living wage law adopted by a major city. That was in Los Angeles in 1997. 2 years ago, I published a book about the problem of housing segregation and outline a series of, I think, bold strategies that are feasible and that could dramatically reduce racial inequality in the U.S. One of the readers of that book helped me set up a nonprofit called the Inclusivity Institute, which every week now works on initiatives with community groups in several major cities to try to foster desegregation. So these issues are very important to me. My research as a law professor at UCLA is largely about issues of racial inequality. I've studied affirmative action for many years and thought about its costs and its benefits. So I do this from a perspective of someone who cares about inequality, but is nonetheless gravely concerned about measures like Prop 16. So why do I think Prop 16 is something that Democrats should oppose? Well, I've got 7 reasons. So let me work through my list. The first reason is that Democrats are the party that really pushed through the legislation in the 1960s that prohibited discrimination. Democrats are a party that historically has been against discrimination, and we should not lightly depart from that ideal. We should not lightly endorse government policies that allow the government to make decisions based on race. The second reason is that if we're going to do it, we definitely don't want to do it in a situation where Asian Americans, another minority group, are going to be the main victims. I don't know if all the listeners are aware of this, but most of the discussion about Prop 16, most of the advocacy about Prop 16 has focused on the University of California. And the clear agenda of folks within the university who want Prop 16 is to use it to reduce the Asian representation, to discriminate against Asian American applicants, to admit more applicants from what are considered to be underrepresented minorities, Blacks and Hispanics. Asian Americans have a long history of being discriminated against in California, which may make this whole initiative unconstitutional even if it passes, but it seems incredibly ill-advised to allow the state to reinstitute discrimination against Asian Americans. Reason number 3 is that Prop 16 is often billed as being about affirmative action, but it's really important to understand that most affirmative action is legal in California. It was not affected, not mentioned by Prop 209. Prop 209 focused on getting rid of preferences and discrimination. But most forms of affirmative action don't require that. And the proof of that is that the University of California, my institution, launched its biggest affirmative action effort ever after Prop 209 was passed. It happened because the leadership of the university realized that they can no longer maintain racial diversity just by using whatever size preference they needed to. So they orchestrated a large outreach campaign. And this had many prongs. They fostered collaborations between UC campuses, including my own, and schools in low-income areas to try to improve educational outcomes there. It involved helping high school students understand University of California requirements, the so-called A to G requirements, and make sure that more of them actually completed them. It set up a bunch of pipelines so that students who were interested in college could come and visit campuses, learn more about the programs. It did direct tutoring for people who wanted to improve their ability to compete in high school and on test scores. So it was an effort that involved hundreds of millions of dollars. And the good news is that it was very successful. It's often said by proponents of Prop 16 that Prop 209 devastated the minority presence at the university, but the opposite is actually the case. I've written a number of things about this, and you can find them on the No on 16 website. But black enrollment took a temporary hit right after Prop 209, but within 2 years was at higher levels than it had been before and continued to rise. Black enrollment is now about double what it was before Prop 209. Hispanic enrollment is about 4 times as high as it was. And when you take these numbers and you measure them relative to the size of groups demographically among California high school graduates, both African Americans and Hispanics are significantly better represented now than they were before Prop 209. So this outreach effort, this affirmative action that the university undertook, was actually wildly successful. It's frustrating to me that it hasn't gotten the credit that it deserves, because it's really a template for what other universities should be doing. So reason number 4 is that the diversity effort that we're seeing behind Prop 16 is, I think, a kind of a groupthink problem, a groupthink reaction to the George Floyd killing and other events in the United States. There's so much talk about solving racial problems by increasing diversity in institutions. And I think that that's something that Democrats ought to recognize as just being way too simple-minded. In other words, we shouldn't be fostering solutions that put band-aids on problems by sort of making it look like the outcomes are okay. We ought to be working on the pipeline issues. We ought to be working on the underlying problems that cause racial inequality in society. So that's why, to me, trying to address housing segregation and school segregation is much more powerful and much more important strategy than trying to achieve exact proportional representation at various University of California campuses. And what I said earlier about the UC effort to address the pipeline really illustrated how the pre-209 approach didn't work as well as the post-209 approach. If you look at minority enrollment at the university before Prop 209, it was very flat for 8 or 9 years. It was like, well, you know, the officials figured they had achieved their targets and they didn't need to do anything more. It was only after 209 and these race-neutral affirmative action measures went into effect that you saw these enrollment levels take off. And what's even more important is that the use of large preferences at places like the University of California has been shown to have boomerang effects upon the people who it's intended to help. Again, before Prop 209, UCLA had a substantial number of blacks entering each year, but their credentials were way below those of their classmates. And many of them had a lot of difficulty competing in that environment. The 4-year graduation rate for African Americans at UCLA in the mid-90s was 13.5%. That's 13.5%. So about less than 1 in every 7 African Americans starting at UCLA was graduating in 4 years. A huge number were not graduating at all. And those who didn't graduate very frequently migrated out of tough majors, STEM majors, science and engineering, towards less demanding majors as a way of trying to survive. After Prop 209, these really large preferences went away. As I said, they were replaced by better outreach mechanisms, and the outcomes started improving almost right away. Within 10 years, the graduation rate of African Americans at UCLA had tripled, the 4-year graduation rate. University-wide had also increased dramatically. The numbers also went up dramatically for Hispanics. Both Hispanic and African American students started finishing science majors at a really high rate, much, much higher rate than they had before. This is what I refer to in my work as the mismatch problem. Mismatch was a really severe problem at UC before Prop 209, and it was largely cured by the steps that we're taking after Prop 209. So let's see, I think that's 6 of my reasons. 7th reason is that I'm really concerned about sort of the liberty interest that has been undermined by this intense focus on diversity, and the attitude that anyone who is opposed to these sort of very simplistic diversity strategies like Prop 16 is a racist or is somehow unworthy of being in the mainstream conversation. I'm very aware in academic environments how much this sort of talk has chilled the ability of people to discuss these issues in a rational way, a fact-based way. There's a tremendous amount of pressure to conform to groupthink and not question these things. So I was in a debate yesterday with someone who argued that, well, yes, we should support Prop 16 because the regents have unanimously endorsed it. And, you know, it's a really bad argument because the regents are not very familiar with the facts. I debated a regent last week who had no idea what had actually happened after Prop 209, made enormous factual misstatements on the air. But also the regents are they're under this pressure to sort of conform or be ostracized by the group. And being political animals, they tend to conform. So there's a real liberty interest that is under assault by the way that we're talking about race in America. And we have to resist that. And we have to show that as Democrats, we believe in free expression. We believe in free debate. Those are core values. So I think any one of these 7 reasons is enough reason to vote against Prop 16. But together, well, I hope it's persuasive. Thanks very much.